Welcome to the Eyes Wide Open Life podcast. I'm Rocco Jarman. This podcast is still relatively new and too new to have what I might call a typical guest. If there was such a thing as a typical guest for my podcast, the guest that I have on in today's episode would possibly be slightly atypical, which is interesting because the area of overlap, the guest is a poet and a philosopher, and the area of overlap is exactly my core vocation, poetry and philosophy. And it's at the heart of all my work. And it's not flowery sonnets and silliness or pontificating with the nihilists and all the rest of it. It's not that kind of poetry and not that kind of philosophy. It's the reaching for and wrestling with metaphor and archetype, the stuff that is foundational to our deeper psychological thinking and reasoning. And there's a poem that I wrote some years back now that actually speaks beautifully to this and actually ties in with the conversation that I have today. This piece is called True Poetry. Channeling true poetry, not the droned litanies of rhyming words and the lavish tithe paid in awkward metaphors, but the rare and sacred priesthood of invoking the spectres of lost truths from the Elysian fields of our inner psyches, a vocation which pays not a lot, but allows us to bleed out what aches us, and poetry really is the only way we are able to get at the more occult parts of our own minds with the crude liturgy or language. In today's episode, I am joined in conversation with Australian poet, philosopher, and musician Simon Drew. Simon and I began speaking in regards to the promotion of his new book, The Poet and the Sage. Simon and I have significant overlap and convergence in our areas of vocation, namely poetry and philosophy, and some interesting areas of digression, namely academia and theology. But it would be fairer to say it's potential digression. Because as you can tell, Simon has more of that humility, which I like, around submitting himself to the process of academia and a master's degree, for example. And in that, he's finding ways to challenge the limitations and find room for creative expression within those boundaries. As you will also tell, Simon has developed his previous intuitions very much within the context of Christianity. But again, as you'll hear, he has the heart and the mind to plumb the universal essence of that wisdom and diplomacy, but earnestly sidestep the dogma of haughtiness that usually typifies the Christian domain. And it's precisely that quality which made me enjoy this conversation with Simon. Simon's own podcast used to be called The Practical Stoic and has now been renamed to The Walled Garden, which says something about Simon's journey from a more secular worldview, well, originally a more religious dogmatic worldview in Mormonism, to a more secular worldview in Stoicism, and now to one that admits more of the sacred, which is where Simon and I converge again on what is, I believe, most relevant, which is that sacred does not need to have anything to do with shared ideas of religion or God or whimsy. It's simply the answered wish to find something deep, foundational, and beautiful about this world, and our private sense of gratitude and belonging that we get from that discovery. So in the episode, we cover some of Simon's work, I share some of my own, and we discuss the experience and the calling that leads us through journeys of awakening, and the paradox of simultaneous blessings and burdens that one dutifully collects along the way on such a journey. So please enjoy the episode and the conversation with Simon Drew. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Australian poet and philosopher Simon Drew. Simon, thanks for making the time to have a conversation with me on the Eyes Wide Open Life podcast.
Yeah, Rocco, it's great to be here. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, good. So just for the listeners' benefit, Simon and I know very little about each other. We've listened to a bit of each other's work and then decided to have a conversation. It's probably going to be a meandering conversation and less of an interview. But that being said, let's have a couple of orientation questions. Simon, how would you, so before this chunk of the recording obviously goes to air, I'm going to re-listen to everything and do a lovely preamble about you shining light on your work and your efforts. But how would you describe yourself?
Yeah, cool. It's I think you can appreciate this, Rocco. As an artist, somebody of the creative mind, it's really difficult to nail yourself down as this is what I am. I think what I used to answer that question like would have been more in the assertive, like this is what I do, this is exactly what I am, but it came from a different place. I think now I would describe myself in terms of not what I'm trying to be, but what I'm stepping back and watching my life, watching the adventure that I'm going on, and I'm saying, oh, that's what I am, and that's what I am. And so I think I'll go to something that I recently put on my website to describe me. I said, I'm a philosopher in my heart, because that tends to be the direction that I'm going. I love exploring deep philosophical, theological questions with people, bringing them into that adventure, exploring what it means to live a good life. I believe I'm a poet by calling. That's something that I didn't choose to explore. It happened when I started writing, and that's just the direction I'm going artistically and perhaps theologically as well. And I'd say that I'm a musician in my being. I've been singing and playing music since a very young age, and I can't live my life without it. And that's where I'm at.
What instruments or modalities?
So I have. It's funny. I have a Bachelor of Music in jazz, trumpet, and vocal performance, right? And so that's kind of an abstract thing. But my first instrument, I would say, I've always been singing. My mum tells me that she was pushing me around in a trolley and people were coming up and just delighted to see like a 3-year-old singing going around the shopping center. But my first instrument was actually piano. I fell in love with the instrument, but as soon as I started getting instruments, it was all about, play at this time and this place, and my creative mind just fell away. I hated the instrument after that. But I always kept on noodling around on it. It's funny because the piano and the didgeridoo were my first instruments.
Wow.
I became obsessed with the Aboriginal culture at a very young age. But then the thing is, you'll find this interesting, Rocco. I mean, like I went and got my degree in jazz trumpet and singing, but now I've got a didgeridoo behind me, which I've just started picking up again. Last year, I started learning piano again, actually in 2020. And I've recorded an album on piano. So I've kind of done a 360 where I've, started on those instruments, went on to some others, came right back.
Do you find that you had the opportunity to fall back in love with things that you had fallen out of love with because you had transcended the sense of obligation to other people's expectations or your own old expectations?
Yeah, mostly I would say my old and a little bit of other people's as well. But I think it was about, a person who really inspires me is Miles Davis. Not always for the music, but for his philosophy behind creation. Like
it's authenticity.
Authenticity 100% of the way. I'm not doing this for anybody else except for my creativity, that spirit that flows through me, that, lock onto that. And that was one thing, I started sitting there and thinking, okay, I'm going to watch myself as if I don't know who I am. And I'm going to see, okay, what instrument do I really love to play? Right. And it's funny, after I had one of those Wayne's World moments in my local music store where I saw this piano and I was like, she will be mine, like I had that moment and I spent way too much money. I bought myself a piano. And after about a year, I noticed that I had practiced piano more in that year than I'd practiced trumpet or singing in my entire life. Wow. And I have a degree in those, right. And that to me was stepping back and saying, okay, I'm not a jazz trumpeter and singer. No, I'm a musician. But hang on, I write poetry. I'm an artist of sorts. Okay,
and then there isn't good enough words. Yes,
I'm a creative individual. Okay, let's just try to be whatever it is that I am instead of continuing with things. And listen, I love the trumpet. I love the flugelhorn. You know, I love playing baritone horn. Horns are great, and it suits me. And I love being on stage with my jazz band. There is no better feeling than being there locked in with that band, you know, and an audience who is right there with you. But creatively, as an artist, I flow towards singing, piano, didgeridoo, that sort of stuff.
So the appeal of being on stage, especially in the jazz context, is very much, I would imagine, about improvisation and flow.
Yes, very much so.
Right. That's interesting. So you mentioned two very dear vocations to me, which is poetry and philosophy. And you said a philosopher by heart and a philosopher in your heart, and
poet by calling.
Poet by calling. I have something to share with you here quickly. Excuse me. I wrote this. It says, the poet that begins writing poetry trying to extrude philosophy gives us both terrible poetry and poor philosophy. But a poet that sees with the heart and reasons with the mind, the very eyes artists see the world with, meets an elegant philosophy along the inner road, the journalism of the human condition. And that's how I reconcile this, because a lot of the philosophy that I push out into the world, I try to package it in poetic context because I like hearing it that way. And it rolls off the tongue better, and it lands in the ears better, and it hits the heart better, and it stays better. And I think it's more poignant and real when packaged that way. But it was a way that I had to learn, very much, as you say, by getting out of my own way. Because when you try and force something like that, it always appears exactly that, which is forced and contrived, which is the exact opposite, of course, of authenticity.
Yeah. And on top of that, like, and by the way, there is so much synchronicity between, you know, our work and our direction as well. I think this is going to be the start of a beautiful relationship long term, because, you know, even just listening to that episode you sent me, I believe it was called On Being and Becoming.
That's right.
And so much of the symbolism within your poetic writing, you know, it's freaky. I was listening to it, I was thinking, man, all of that exists within this book that I've just written, and it flows throughout all of my poetry. And it's that, you know, it's that ground of being that the poet kind of sinks into when they're having that experience of writing poetry, that's so hard to describe what that is. But I mean, to your point about the style of writing, I mean, I'm studying a Master of Divinity at the moment, and for me, writing an essay where I have to, you know, citations here, and you got to make this here, and you got to put this here, like it's.
I find that constraining
to me.
Yes.
It's very constraining, but I think we have to, in a way, trust the voice that we are given. Do you know what I mean? Like,
100%.
You're given the poetic voice, and when you write like that, you have to let go and allow that process to happen. And I just don't think the magic happens unless you can learn how to let go of that.
I concur 100%. In fact, I have a defiant irreverence for the constraints of academia, because first of all, you cannot synthesize and contain what is coming through us. And I don't believe it's from us. I believe it's through us. And what on earth would a dated, formulaic, siloed way of slicing information down into these little sovereign pockets, what would that know about me? I've never been here before. Yeah.
Can I give you a classic example of that?
Shoot, please.
Well, I want to give you an example of when it's done right, because, you know, I'm in university, I'm looking around, I'm seeing, you know, how are they, like you say, how are they learning about the student's individual path and helping them to flourish on that path? The first class that I did in my Master of Divinity was last year, and it was on the Old Testament prophets. Now, one of the reasons why I chose to do that as my first class was because the lecturer, her name's Rachel Crone, a beautiful person, and she had the wisdom to say that for your final essay, you have a choice. Either a 3,000 word essay, or you can do an art piece and write 1,000 words kind of describing what it is that you're exploring in that art piece, right? So I thought, I'm doing this class, right? Because that's an easy gateway in for me for the Master of Divinity. And so we were supposed to give her one art piece and 1,000-word essay. What I ended up giving her was a 7,500-word essay, 52 poems, and a 1-hour-long music album. And that to me was like a perfect example of, if you allow the student to learn, put constraints on them, yes, because in constraints there is a certain element of creativity that comes out. And if you're learning how to discipline yourself in any tradition, there should be some constraints. But she had the wisdom to say, give me an art piece if that's what you're looking for. And that allowed me to just go nuts, like that. The creativity flowed, and I learned so much more than what I would have, I believe, if I was forced to fully constrain myself to that academic model.
Yeah, I think it was Aristotle that said education is the lighting of a fire, not the filling of a cup.
Oh man, that's so good. Yeah,
and it just explains, without being too verbose about it, exactly what the intention should be. Help the listeners. What is the study that you're busy doing? When you said Master of Divinity.
Yeah. So
explain to us what a Master of Divinity. Is it a degree or a master's, or?
It's a master's.
Okay, what would that entail? What does that mean?
Well, let's start with perhaps the ends in mind. This is the kind of degree that people would take if they wanted to get into Christian ministry or chaplaincy, work in theology. I felt very strongly like a path that I might want to go to. No, I would be honored to go down this path of chaplaincy, whether it is in hospitals or in the military, because again, going back to this idea that I'm stepping back and watching myself and seeing what I do, the more and more I work with people in my philosophical mentoring practice, it's like the deeper our relationship gets, the more it becomes almost a relationship of soul doctoring. That's what I love to do. And so it appeared to me that I had two choices. Okay, you go down the psychological path, or you go down the, which will be a very scientific path, and that's brilliant. Or you say, okay, well, people have been wrestling with these deep theological questions about the soul and divinity and what it means to live a rich, fulfilling life. This is a deep tradition, and I felt much more inclined towards the theological path over the maybe more psychological, scientific path.
Sure.
And so really, after writing The Poet and the Sage, that to me was a recognition of, okay, this is what I am. Now, what can I do to maybe play the game of my culture? I want to do that because our culture has given us certain gifts. One of them is university, where if you do that, you get certain tickets in our culture, and wouldn't mind having those tickets. And on top of that, I felt a strong calling towards the path of theology, and that's why I'm there. So and the thing is, just as a little caveat there, I grew up as a Mormon, left the church. I'm currently not attending any Christian denomination. And I make it very clear in all of my classes that I'm here to learn, I'm here to explore. And if there's something to be found in the Bible, which there is certainly something to be found, that's not a question really. But my question is, how transformative can that be? And so I'm willing to go along in the adventure, although I'm not in any denomination. I'm there willing to learn,
So almost reconnecting with the original unsullied essence of it instead of the dogma and the
yes. Yeah, I would say that. And look, the degree is going to naturally be very dogma orientated.
Yeah.
Which is why I was so grateful for Rachel opening her doors in her class to say, okay, well, if you've got a bit of an artistic, perhaps even a mystic, which comes out in me, well, let's go with that as well, because I mean, there always this is the major challenge of any, university that has divinity courses now is that the church always has to have a balance between the dogma and the mysticism. There has to be
they should, whether they do. Yes.
That's it. That's it. And so, I'm here. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be doing this course. I'm genuinely loving the learning, but it will always be a struggle for me as an artist because that's what I am first. I'm not an academic, and so much of academia seems to be there to create more academics, and that it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on academia, and it's actually like a kind of religious dogma itself, which doesn't really allow for free thinking in many ways, etc. I wanted to ask you now about the works that you've written, because I think that's primarily certainly your intention for wanting to have conversations with podcasters and so on. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's funny. I always knew that I wanted to write a book, but the question is always like, what's going to be about? And so we so often say, okay, I'm going to write a book. This is what it's going to be about. This is going to be the message, and then we write it. When I started writing last year, it was kind of an accident. No, it was 2020. It was kind of an accident how it all happened. I started writing, and this was the birth of my poetic career. I started writing down this strange waking dream that I was having. It was very weird, very symbolic, just these archetypal metaphors and characters. And I finished writing that dream. It was a few pages, and I thought, wow, this is weird. But I knew that there was one person who I could take it to who would tell me what to do with it. And that was Sharon LaBelle. Yes. She's my kind of mentor, and she's the wisest individual I've ever known, and such a beautiful person, and so well educated as well. And so I took this to her and I said, Sharon, what do you make of this? And she read it. Oh, she knows so well how to deal with artists, because she just said, just do it, go, whatever, like, it's great. Just keep on going with this, keep on going, And so I did. And what ended up coming out was The Poet and the Sage, a collection of poetry and prose that follows a narrative, but nonetheless is not, it's philosophy, it's theology. It's taken me a while to say this, but it is a certain type of mystic writing. And it was a strange experience, one of those ones where you step back and you think, I don't know what the hell this is or what to do with it, but I've got to get it out there.
Who's it for?
Who's it for? It's for, see, I rushed to answer the question before even really deeply considering that. That's always been a struggle for me to think who it's for, because I want it to be for everybody. I think we all want our works to be for everybody, right? We deeply hope that no matter who reads it will be transformed and moved by it.
Yes.
But I also know that that's just not the case. I mean, you take a look at somebody like Carl Jung, to a highly academic, highly conscientious individual, maybe just a hard nose, what Alan Watts might have called the prickle, they're not going to get a lot out of Carl Jung's work, because his work is embedded within his mind, which is more of the creative, artistic individual. And so I understand that my work, probably the people who will get most out of it will be the creatives, the artists, the people who are a little bit, again, as Alan Watts would have said, a little bit more gooey, right? And I've noticed that as I've got responses from people. But I think it's for people who are deeply questioning fundamental questions about what it means to live a good and meaningful life, and who are also open to the fact that our ability to commune with what is most divine about us is not a thing of the past that only the people in, say, the Bible or, these ancient religious traditions have access to. I think that's what the process of writing the book taught me, was that that's a very living thing that happens now, and we can access that. But
sure.
It's
that's the Poet and the Sage.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Are those do those words belong to anyone in the narrative of the book? Is there a poet and is there a sage, or is the same person the poet and the sage? How do I apply the title to the work? Yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I guess narratively speaking, it is a poet who is, navigating a certain philosophical landscape in his current culture, his current time, and wishes upon a star that he might spar with wisdom. And that's when the whole adventure kind of gets out of control. Then it's kind of one of those be careful what you wish for moments where, okay, well, now there's a sage who's going to be communing with you and guiding you on this path. And it's funny, Rocco, you might share this same feeling with your own work, but I feel as though, and this is a common experience among many artists, the work is in many ways often a few steps ahead of the intellectual understanding of the artist.
You don't integrate the understanding of it fully while you're expressing it.
That's it.
So I've written
even
things.
now,
Go on. I'm sorry to interrupt. I've written things and I thought, yeah, that's a cracking piece. Like I wrote one for my wife when we first met before we were married. So it's my second marriage and it's beautiful. I might actually read it to you. And then like a year and a half later, I picked it up and I thought, oh yeah, I wrote this for you. And I read it. And we both read it and we both just burst into tears because the actual depth and meaning of what it actually meant, I didn't even realize at the time. And it was so profound and so poignant and so meaningful to her, and sort of was the story of the biggest transformation and the biggest overcoming that she had ever done in her entire life. And I was, obviously, it's so obvious when you read it, but at the time we missed it. And it took a whole 18 months of living for us to wisen up and understand what had come through. So yeah, it was quite profound. Yeah. So the book is called The Poet and the Sage. Is it meant to be read front to back, or is it meant to be picked up and read between? Yeah.
That's another great question. So I do have an answer to that. And this is actually something that Sharon LaBelle pointed out to me first, right? And then I started doing it like this because she said it's the kind of book that, you can read start to finish, but then you can also just pick it up at a random page. And because of the nature of how it's written, you can choose a verse or a paragraph and there will be something there for you. It's
lends itself to daily contemplation.
That's it. And what I've been doing recently is like, I really hope that people read it like that. I hope they go start to finish at the beginning, but then I hope they play around with it and sit with it. And what I've been doing is
You want it to be a companion.
A companion, certainly. But what I've found is very interesting. What I do now is if I need some advice, and look, I know people are going to be like, the most egotistical thing you could possibly do is go back and sit with your own work.
I use my own work.
I think we have to, as artists, go back and revisit things. But I now turn to a random page and then, okay, cool, that part right there, that stood out to me first. And then I'll go to another page and I'll connect the dots. Okay. And then I'll create an entirely new story that relates to the entire story as it is by choosing and putting together little bits of the book, and it still makes sense for me in that moment, to get advice like that. So it's just interesting. It's a weird, strange book, and I hope people know that when they buy it. But I'm interested to see how it does its work on people, because
have you got one? Well, it must be new to the market then, Simon.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, so this is going to be lovely discovering, and even if it's a slight initial disappointment or whatever it is, you get to encounter this all real time, first time. Yeah. Is there one piece that you'd specifically like to read or to share, or that you think would be poignant right now, so someone can get a taste for your work? Is that a good idea, or?
Yeah, I think so. Let me grab it. Let me have a think about what might be the...
Yeah, sure. And then while you're doing that, I was going to say, and look, I can tell something about you because I'm a forensic scientist of the soul, and I listen very carefully to people's souls. It's how I'm able to do what you would frame as chaplaincy. So, among other things, I studied biblical Hebrew for 2 years. Now, that doesn't mean I can speak Hebrew. It means I can look at the roots and gates of a word and break it down and start looking at it like a fractal lens and discern very, very deep meaning. And then if you look at the passage in the Torah, or in now the Old Testament, and you understand the actual meaning of these words or the way these words are connected, it lends a much, much, much deeper context and meaning to the work, so profoundly deeper that the superficial story is almost laughable. And then the superficial story is also part of the metaphor. So the richness just sort of keeps growing and keeps growing. And secondly, the thing I wanted to say about that forensic ability that I have is, in time, I hope, that you come to not preface or prefix that statement about relying on your own work, because fuck everyone.
Yeah.
And really what this is about is self-permission and authenticity. And of course, there cannot be authenticity without vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because if you want to be seen for who you truly are, or if you want to be loved for who you truly are, you have to be seen for who you truly are. And that takes vulnerability. And, you know, I like my work. And I'm not ashamed to say it, not even remotely, about my work. I find it quite beautiful. And it moves my heart. I find it quite valuable. And like my mind rejoices just like a heart would rejoice, because it's intelligent as well. And I find it enlightening, and my inward eyes are turned heavenward when I read some of that work. And even though I'm proud to have been a vessel that came through, I don't sit there and patting myself on the back, but I had the courage to be authentic and to say it in a language that of my choosing, or whatever I was most comfortable attuning to. And these are the fruits of that courage. So I absolutely endorse somebody looking to their own work for inspiration. Why not? Because the whole reason I started doing any of this is because I went looking for better men. I went looking for leaders, men or women. And I always encountered people and they were flawed in some way. Now, that either makes me extremely judgmental or nitpicky, or it just means my soul was saying no a lot of times. And in the beginning, I thought it was a form of punishment. You're looking in the world and you can't find what you're looking for, until I eventually discovered what it actually meant was it was an invitation to make or create that which I couldn't find in the world. And I put my heart and soul into some of this stuff. And it was a companion to me in processing my own very, very deep grief and my own awakening and transformation. And these are absolutely priceless breadcrumbs that if I ever feel lost, all I need to do is go back to some of this and I remember where I was. I remember the lesson that I learned. I remember the part of the journey I was on. And it's, I don't think really there's anything like that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate those words, because all the way along my own path, I am encountering people just like you who say, don't be ashamed to use these words, or to rely on yourself. And I think it's funny. The thing is, I had the religious upbringing, which grounded me in that tradition, fell away from it, and fell into the very secular world. And I started to think, man, there's some words that I left behind that I never use now, and I'm even afraid to use them. Words like sacred, words like holy, worship,
How wonderful.
These words where you think, man, that's part of the lexicon of this religion that we fall away from. And then even I was saying this to Sharon when we actually launched my book. I said, the thing about writing this book was it actually transformed my metaphysical foundation to where, well, it didn't transform the foundation. awakened me to the foundation that was already there. And so
Yes.
I find myself constantly battling between the world I once knew, where I am the mover, and the world where I am now, where I am the moved. Do you know what I mean?
Being versus becoming. Yeah.
That's it. And it's a struggle, because you don't, like, it's awkward to move between those worlds confidently.
You get better at it. And of course it takes what everything takes, which is practice.
Yeah.
And once you get better at that, it becomes a lot more comfortable exercise.
Yeah.
You know, I wrote something the other day, which is, again, I think poignant here. It says the answer to the riddle of being versus becoming is stepping behind the intentionality of where we would wish to be, and then stepping into an acceptance of where we are now and how we got here, over and over and over again, until we realize it's a dance. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And see, that it makes so much sense to me. Like, life is so much better conceptualized in the artistic terms. Like, it's a dance, you know, it's a song, you know, it's a play. I love what Seneca said. He said, it's not the length of life that matters. No, he said, life is like a play. It's not the length of it that matters, but the excellence of the acting. I thought,
exactly.
How beautiful is that?
Exactly.
And I have to say, just so you know, I know which poems I'm going to read in this book.
Oh, fantastic.
Like it. All right.
So one quick comment. You mentioned you're reticent at times to use the word sacred. Let me perform an exorcism on you.
Yeah.
Okay. As a public service to all your to all your future work and all your future listeners, here's something I wrote. It says, sacred does not need to have anything to do with shared ideas of religion or God or whimsy. It's simply the answered wish to find something deep, foundational, and beautiful about this world, and our sense of private gratitude and belonging that we get from that encounter.
Yeah. So it's trying to remove us from the dogmatic approach of...
I'm taking words back. So many.
Yeah.
And all of my work is archetypal and symbolic and metaphorical, and there with it a lot of deep richness. And as you say, it's a richness sort of born of because what you're really talking about, if you took the word Christianity or religion out of the piece, the one word that would still fit without breaking any continuity or meaning is that of myth. And myth is a kind of tapestry that's made up of threads of archetypes. It's all woven into a picture that can be seen and understood. And we need that human context and that anthropomorphization. And it's done with a sort of imprecise dimension of time, but it also has the ability to trace these threads of the tapestry back. And then we can sort of verify the truth in this way, because we can follow the thread back. And in this way, we can reliably trace the threads. And the challenge or risks that sort of arrives with community is this power of consensus, our shared predictive models, which, you know, can be a means to dissipate shame and culpability through the redeemer or the scapegoat model. But by the same token, we need, instead of reducing everything to a clinical reductionism, those don't seem to answer the pain in my heart. I can't take pills for everything. I can't go to a counselor with a certificate for in, you know, reading off a list that's going to make myself feel better. And sometimes we get tired in ways that neither rest nor sleep provide any respite. And the only thing that provides respite is this interplay between subjectivity and objectivity. Where do I fit in? Is this the same as everybody else? Even though mine is unique, there is a sameness with everyone else. And myth is the vehicle that we use to make sense out of a shifting world that we can barely understand because it's changing so rapidly. So,
yeah. I see. This is the sort of stuff that I'm trying to wrap my head around, because you probably, and you know, talk to me about this. When was the moment when you realized, okay, was there a moment where you were like, okay, I'm going to make myth, or was there a moment where you just realized, oh, this is just what I'm doing? This is just how it's happening in my art. What was it for you?
It's a slow and steady awakening, really, and just an incremental. Actually, there was a moment, a decisive moment, but then what the implications were of that took a long time. So the pivotal moment was a moment of self-permission, and it was self-discovery and claiming and discovering the answer to the question, who am I? And I don't mean who am I from a existential perspective, because I'm still figuring that out. But I mean, who am I from what identity do I align with? And not even identity, what is the shape of my character, my quality, my ethos deep in my heart? In other words, if you beat everything off me and out of me and take everything away from me that I can't hold on to, what will be left? If you took a cosmic anvil and you threw my soul on it and you just beat it, what would remain after all the sparks had flown and all the rust had come off? And it was the courage to look even at the dark, unlovely parts of myself and say, if I don't accept these things now, I'm forever going to be projecting an image of myself that is not wholly and authentically myself. And I would rather be hated for who I truly am and have the freedom of that than be loved for who I'm not and have to keep up that charade for the rest of my life. And I made the commitment there and then to preemptively choose a life of loneliness, if that's what it meant. Because at night when I go to bed, or if I look in the mirror, I want to love the one that looks back. And to do that, I had to, there was no way you can't only look at the pretty things. I had to rip everything off. And I was afraid initially at what I might find. But, the opposite of fear is not, the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. And I had to overcome that, that fear of being afraid of what I would find, because sooner or later in relationship with other people, that thing that you're trying to hide, which Jung called the shadow, is going to emerge one way or another. So I'm either going to do that work tonight, or I'm going to drag it out for the next 7 years of my life. And I thought to myself, sorry, I swear more than you do, Tom. I thought, fuck that shit, not on my watch. If nothing else, I will be known to myself as a being of courage. And it was difficult, but I just kept looking and I refused to look away. And then I asked myself, honestly, no bullshit, no pretense, no idealistic answer. Is this what I am? Do I like this? Is this what I am sexually? Is this what I am? How would I treat people weaker than me? And I just looked bluntly. And to my pleasant surprise, there was nothing that I was ashamed of.
Mm.
In fact, all the things that I were ashamed of was where I had let my shadow projection take over, or when I was acting from fear, not from love. And I realized that what I am is a conviction to act always from love, not from fear. And then to have the discipline of self-awareness to keep asking that question and keep looking at the honest answer. So that was that pivotal moment and that key decision, which I've never, ever wavered from, ever. But the implications of that, what that means in a work context, in a relationship context, what it means to my old community of relationships that seem to have fallen away or I've been excommunicated from in some way or another. There's a lot of grief that came with that, but there's a lot of learning that came from that grief. And so it was both a pivotal, decisive moment, as well as a long process of integration and understanding of the implications of that decision that I had made.
Yeah. Man, that's so inspiring. I love that, because what you're talking about, I mean, the weight of responsibility that you take upon yourself to actually live out that story in your life is something that so few people will do.
Yeah, stepped into
so
my own
few
myth.
People have done.
Yeah.
And it's something that I am constantly struggling to do because it is such a heavy burden to bear, and it's
not. It's a a privilege.
Yes, I would.
I think I know what you mean, though, because
I would agree with that,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I would also say that it is because
heavy is the head that wears the crown.
You're speaking now on the other side of that.
Yes.
You know, but there's people on the other side who are there thinking, you know, here's this mountain, you know, before me, and no matter how big or small the mountain really is to climb, to them it appears as Mount Everest. Do you know what I mean? And and for people who are so embedded in their current life and all of these various responsibilities to people and to their career and or anything really, it seems as though, well, the first step is getting there to even see something along the lines of what you're talking about, right? Which is the first massive battle where, you know, whether we get to choose whether we get there or not is another question. But it just appears to me like the fact that it is a huge responsibility and a burden to bear and also a privilege. And it's a necessity. Do you know what I mean? Like
yes.
And so whether or not it's a burden, whether or not it's a privilege, it doesn't really matter. It's if you have this understanding, if you have this knowledge, it's a necessity. Life is important. What's happening now is important. You have to do it. You know, otherwise God save your soul. You know, you know what I mean? Like,
no, sure. But see, the thing is, and this is something you might relate to. So I understand what you mean. So I think that's the burden of leadership, self-leadership that you're talking about. Because once you step up for yourself, you can never step back. Because otherwise you undermine everything. But there we get lost in story so easily. Because we are flawed human beings and we carry this ego around, the shadow self that we haven't integrated yet. But so this is the foil to that, the weight of that burden that you were talking about. So this is how I did it. I encountered this concept I call true gratitude, capital T, capital G. And a lot of people think gratitude is saying thanks or showing thanks. Now, much like true modesty or true gratitude, it's an act of showing the crowd, the community, maybe some ephemeral God that's watching and judging you, that you have the right stuff because of how you're acting. And if you make that choice with utter conviction. Now, one side note, if you make a choice and you're struggling with a choice, you haven't fully made the choice. Because once you've made the decision, you are preemptively deciding to accept with stoicism all the burdens that come along with it. And that's part of the looking that you have to look at when you make that choice. But for example, if you have a nephew or a niece or some dear loved one, if somebody had to try harm them, you would immediately step up and do something. Now, you won't only do it if the person has a short enough stick. The point is, it's irrelevant of the size of the stick. So in the same way, when you decide to be the captain of your own soul, you're on a ship steering the ship of your soul through stormy seas. There's no one else is coming. There's no one to hand the helm to when a big enough storm comes. And if you've made the decision to step up and grab the helm, it doesn't matter the size of the storm, because come hell or high water, it is only you. So I wrote something about that, and I don't want to steal your thunder and read things, but I think you need to hear this. And it said, I waited for long enough, patiently at first, and then impatiently for a better man to arrive. And he never did. I waited a long time, as men are taught to wait on your betters. And I went looking for them faithfully. And we have been left, I discovered, to my ever-growing surprise, as it always was with all men in such times, that there never were actual people, just hats. The persistent phantoms of expectations of where our betters ought to be. And that when in times of need arise, as only great men do, they put on the fucking hat and take on fully the entire charge of everything that goes with it in an instant, and that instant has arrived. And when you can find no one worthy to lead you, you must become worthy to lead yourself. And part of the healing that we all need to do, that you're going to be doing chaplaincy about in the near future, is really healing the inner child, which is reparenting something that has lost trust in you because of your inauthenticity and your bowing to the crowd and seeking permission from people who honestly don't deserve the right to take up tenancy in your mind. And to rebuild a relationship with that inner child, this is not a form of trust that you can ever step back from. That commitment, once made, it's forever. And it's scary, because what happens if a big enough storm comes? And then you have to admit that true parenthood, true leadership of self, is not pursuant on the size of the storm that comes. It's you're either going to get it right or you're going to die trying.
Yeah.
Because you're the one that's going to live with the regret at the end of the day. So in a way, it is a huge burden. But once you give yourself permission to fail, and once you say to yourself, no, this is exactly, I mean what I say, and I say what I mean. I am committed to this thing. I don't have to make it look any way to anyone. And if I struggle or I fail, I will turn to my inner child and say, it's okay, man, we've got this, because this is the best I've got.
Yeah. That last part right there, this is the best I've got. Okay, I want to talk to you about these things. This is great because you'll understand that it's not often that you speak to someone of the same direction as you, right? And so I'm going to take that advantage, right? Because I have found,
and wavelength,
that's it. I mean, I've found so many of those moments where you might say, God has given me the chance to say, yes, I understand that what you've given me right now is the absolute best that you and I have to offer. It's like you write this sort of stuff and you think, yeah, this is the best of my flock, that I'm sacrificing right here. And despite that, it's almost that process of Jungian individuation, right? Where you have those moments where you realize, yes, this is the path that I'm on. I accept this. Absolutely. But then, like you say, a storm comes and you think, you kind of retreat a little bit, retreat. And then, you have an even bigger moment of, yes, this is you have another moment of realization, and then an even bigger storm comes in. You retreat just a little bit. I perhaps haven't had those that moment of pure 100% commitment, but I've had sequences of stronger commitment and perhaps stronger storms and stronger commitment, So I don't know if it's for me necessarily a moment of I don't know. I turn back, man. That I do that. That's a fault of mine. That's a vice of mine. I turn back. I look back and I think, this path that I'm on.
You turn back now.
Yes.
But you won't turn back always.
Yes.
And whether it's now or somewhere deep in your future, when a more resolute version of you has arrived.
Yeah.
And
I think
this is where you are now, and
on
that's
the
okay.
adventure. I'm happy. That's the thing, right there. What you said, I'm happy with where I'm at. Because there's a certain trust there. That well, I've been given these certain gifts, and okay, something's clearly happening. Something's clearly moving. Trust that the process will happen. I want to read you something.
Please.
Because
I actually wanted to ask you to read some of your stuff, and I've been reading to you.
Well, I'm gonna read you something from The Poet and the Sage, but first I want to see if I can find something here. Okay, I've just looked through two empty books. It might be this one. There's something that I wrote the other day that I think you'd be interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. It's got to be in here somewhere. I'm looking for a poem called The Artist. Here we go. Okay, got it. So let me see if I can read my writing. It says, the true artist is a professional rule breaker, a heretic of the highest order, a peasant in king's garb, a joker in disguise amid a sea of tyrants. Sooner or later, the Joker must lift his cloak and face the crowd. For the true Joker cannot resist a good unveiling with the potential of havoc. Better that the artist reveal himself sooner rather than later, lest the tyrants get the best of each other. The true artist excludes what is unnecessary and includes what is. Now,
the artist of your soul, Simon, the one that is stepping forward and stepping back, that's a necessary part of the journey. And the artist of your fate and your life and your destiny is including what is necessary.
That's what I hope, But to me, I took that to Sharon and I spoke to her about that recently, because I thought there was a moment there where she was speaking to me and she was saying the exact same thing that I was saying in this poem, which is I feel cloaked because I've been one thing. I've been the person discovering the philosophy of Stoicism, and that's what I've been talking about on my podcast for all these years. And I've gathered a following of people who are also on that adventure. But then when I realized that I'm an artist and a poet and somewhat of a mystic, then it's like, okay.
You got to come out the closet, yeah.
Oh, now I'm wondering, if I truly show myself, is everybody going to run away? And the thing is, I know because I've worked with so many of my listeners and I've spoken to them. I've spent time with them, lots of time with them. And I know that the people who truly get what I'm doing, they really understand it and they're all for me taking off that cloak,
But you're still reluctant.
There's still that part of me that holds me back, as I think we all have within us. But here's the thing. Despite all of this, I have to say, I still look back and I'm so grateful for what I have done so far. And I'm sitting in that, because what I find, and you probably find the same thing, is I get an intuition and I think, that's an interesting idea. Maybe that'll happen. 6 months later, it happens. It happened with The Poet and the Sage. About a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, I thought, you know what? I want to read my poetry and play music in cathedrals because that's where it makes most sense to me. And next month, I'm doing my first poetry reading with an organ accompanist in our cathedral here in Brisbane, near where I live.
How wonderful.
It's those sorts of things where I think, just try not to get in the way. I'll go and I'll do things to try and make what I believe would be good for this adventure happen. But at the end of the day, I can't be too hard on myself when I am reluctant to take these steps, because it is quite
So that piece that you've just written, I understand what you're saying. I want to point something out to you if it's not apparent already. The archetype that's threaded throughout that is the trickster archetype.
Yes.
And you paradoxically both feel like the trickster and somebody has played a trick on you, because you feel like you authentically followed the first leg of the path and you portrayed yourself authentically or earnestly as a thing or a version or a label or something was written on the tin, Simon Drew, Stoic podcaster. And in your conviction to that authenticity, suddenly when you woke up, because you were practicing the essence of Stoicism, which is just pure acceptance of what is emerging and unfolding, you realized that didn't define you completely. And now you've spent all this time knitting a cloak that you don't feel comfortable wearing. But you're not sure how the public is going to react to the clothes that you have underneath. And who played this trick on you? And so the obvious invitation to me, you see, the trickster arrives when the adults have left the room. So in the stories, the trickster has their moment when, the gods get invited to the giants' hall and then they drink too much of the mead and then they fall asleep, and that's when the giants are I'm going to do the dirty. It's the trickster that foils the plan. And at the moment, what we're dealing with in the world is a sense of a collective consciousness where people are acting like children, consumed with the drama of the moment. Teenagers argue from a place of ignorance. They're nihilistic. They have fleeting attention spans. They don't respect anything. Plus, they arrive at this moment, stowaways of their own uncertain future, kind of resentful of the baton that's been passed and dropped clumsily, and they have no map for this moment. And so, in the potential tragedy of this moment, all the usual archetypes are at a loss, because the king is waving an ever bigger scepter. The church is waving the rod of sentencing and the olive branch on this hand. They don't know which hand to lift up first. Nobody has game. And the only one that can have game is the artist and the trickster, because now is a time of chaos, and this is the time of the trickster. That's when they come into their own, because they thrive off chaos. So you, one way or another, so you are going to milk this, or you're going to be your own experiment.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you wrote about
so
the
much
trickster,
fun to talk with somebody like yourself who you're, as you say, we're on that same wavelength, and you know, I have these sorts of conversations with Sharon LaBelle as well, you know, because she's just that, she's of the same mind, and it strengthens me, you know, to hear somebody's, I understand what's happening in that poem. But here's the thing, like I don't understand a lot of it, but I'm starting to understand it. You know, I'm an idiot. You know, I don't know anything about you know, the depth of these archetypes, but they appear. You know, that they come out in the writings, and that's another cool thing about, you know, taking the prophecy class first. When I did that last year, is I chose to look at prophecy and how it interacts with poetry and music. Because, you know, there's times in the Bible where the prophets are playing instruments, and there's times where the prophecy is delivered through poetry. And I ended up finding my way through to Jung's essays on, what is it? Here we go. That's it. Essays on analytical psychology, where he's talking about the prophet's voice, how it partakes of this underlying kind of foundational goo of archetypal metaphor and symbolism and all this sort of stuff, and just bubbles up, you know.
Again, this is going to be a self-permission thing for you, Simon, because you preface it by saying, I'm an idiot, I don't know any of this archetypal stuff. The whole point of archetypes is to not require a learned understanding. It lends itself to a noetic understanding. And actually, you know exactly what the fuck it means. You just don't want to be guilty of having jumped to the wrong conclusion.
I think you've got something to say there. Yeah, I think you've got something to say there.
Yeah, exactly. And
absolutely,
all universal work will rest on archetype.
Yeah,
because a more foundational version of the world that we think exists is not this brick and mortar flesh and bone. It is the archetypal wash that we all, and of course this world is superimposed on top of that world. It's not somewhere else out there that you reach. It's not like Avalon or Camelot or something that you have to go to. It's of course superimposed on top of this one. And that's what the mystical transcendence is all about. It is learning to not believe the constraints of the physical paradigm and listening with the heart, because the heart understands noetically. Yeah, exactly. So now
that's wisdom. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't arrive at that because anybody gave it to me or I found the right book. I arrived at that through a mistrust of old books. Yeah. So now let's talk about new books. Why don't you read something from the poet and the sage for us, Simon?
Yeah, I'd love to. I've never read this one when people have requested it on shows, but I thought this is the perfect time to get this one out. So I'm actually going to read you two poems. And these two poems were not a part of the original canon of poetry and prose that was going into The Poet and the Sage, but I wrote them later on and I thought,
they belong.
That's it. It's funny because I wrote them in two parts and these two poems actually almost perfectly tell the story of The Poet and the Sage. And so the first poem is directly after the prologue. So it's basically the first poem of the book. And the last poem is the second part of that poem goes at the very end of the book. So no, actually they're both, anyway, not important. So here it goes. This first one's called Rise. On a dark and frosty meadow for the dawning of the sun, the morning birds are singing, for their day has just begun. A cool breeze gently shifts the trees while all the world is waking. A golden hue now pierces night as distant stars are fading. The sun now slowly rises, giving light to those who see, and all his face now shines upon, reflects with fervent glee. And all who are nourished by the sun's peculiar rays. The campfire warms them through their nights, and the sunlight through their days. The cold and lonely valley now becomes a lively sight, as foxtails glide above the grass and bugs reflect the light. And all that is ising as the daylight shelters all from the terrors that the nighttime brings, but every sun must fall. He'll rise with might to midday heights and bear his horrid fate. He'll slowly sink below the hills neath Mother Nature's weight. And never will he shrink from this divine preordination, for even the sun that shines above is bound by fate's causation. Wilt thou now feel the warmth of he who shines from heaven's heights, sharing wisdom with each son of his who every candle lights? Wilt thou listen to his promptings as he seeks to chaos part? Wilt thou sit upon a mountain, writing wisdom from thy heart? Or wilt thou ever tarry in the land of distant dreaming? Wilt thou let thy fire smoulder as the darkness now is scheming? I say, arise and be thou clean, for the night is soon to come, and all who now are sleeping will a dragon's feast become. And then this is part 2, called Comes the Night.
Wow, just to stop there for a second, because that's lovely and
very relevant to what we've been talking about too.
Well, it's very relevant to what's happening in the world right now. And whether you realize this or not, in time, especially if we keep talking together and working together, you're going to understand that anything remotely approximating the synthesis of the Catholic Church or any denomination of Christianity has absolutely no monopoly on what you're talking about. So it's a it's a worthy enough door if that's the door you find, and if the imagery and the iconography relates to many people, so be it, c'est la vie, you do you. But the universality of what you're discussing there predates any work that falls under the canon of Christianity and goes so far beyond it.
Wouldn't you say that it, and this is, again, I'm going to preface what I'm saying. I'm going to do that because I always want people to know that I take what I do very seriously and I try not to be egotistical about it because it's not something that I feel I'm necessarily doing. I feel that there is a done, and so what I would say is that I feel as though I'm participating in the same tradition as those who channeled through them some sort of universal exploration of the fundamentals of being, you might put it like that. But yeah, I'll read this last one. This is called Comes the Night. And it's very simple. It just goes like this. The valley now is quiet. Evening's gloom has dyed the sky. The burning sage has fallen, though the Logos will not die. For the darkness doth make known that which the daylight hath concealed. a sea of stars and a pregnant moon, and an ordered cosmos revealed. So that's part 2.
It's good. That's
coming.
I'd like
you,
to listen to them again.
That.
That's you're in it now, Simon.
Yeah, you can say that again.
Yes, you're in it now, and yeah, you've legitimately found something, my friend.
I appreciate that, Rocco. And
I'm a man to tell.
Repeat. Yeah, I want to repeat what I said at the start. I listened to your poetry on the episode that you sent me, and I thought, well, looks like we're both tapping into that same, we're both playing the same instrument here.
Same wind, different sails.
Yes.
Hmm.
So I hope we have many more conversations. I hope we get to work together.
Yeah, I like that. I like those 2 pieces. So the one was Rise.
Yeah.
And the other one, which was a theme in one of those poems that I read in Being and Becoming. The first act of climbing is the first part of climbing is the act of rising oneself from the floor. Yeah.
Let me tell you, when you started talking about climbing to the top of the branches, if people read The Poet and the Sage, they will see that the entire book is based around this picture of the tree with the roots, the seed, the trunk and the branches. The branches of eternity is what they're called in The Poet and the Sage. Climbing to the top of those branches. It's so funny because it was only recently that I was writing a poem that had that exact same imagery of, you climb to the top of these branches because that's where you know that you'll see God, and you get up there and you're reaching higher, and it's just one of those freaky things. And so I think another reason why I am slowly coming out of my shell is because this is a new landscape to me. And another theme that keeps on coming out in my poetry is, do you mind if I read you one more?
Please. Okay. And then I'm going to recommend you something which, if you haven't encountered it already, you're going to thank me for, because first of all, he'll teach you how to read your own poetry just by listening to him. And secondly, he is the master, and his name is David White.
David White, okay.
And he has a poem called Santiago, which I'm going to send you.
Okay. I would
He is the master, yes.
Well, I will take any recommendation that I see. I'm slowly finding all of these people along my way who I say, yes, anything you say, I will go and read. But so this poem is actually from, it's from a collection of 13 poems that I put together alongside my music album, my first piano album called Paradisa Suite.
Yes.
And this one is called I Tread Softly There. So this is the theme that keeps on coming out in a lot of my poetry, is tread softly. And that's what I feel I'm trying to do, is I'm trying.
You need to find David White because,
So this is how it goes. Ferns grow in the valley. They block out sun and sky. A darkened, weathered hue of green, some natives passing by. They make no fuss about their way, and neither do they rush. They stop to marvel at the stream which trickles neath the brush. Their mongrel boldly watches for intruders in the scrub. A baby sleeps on mother's back and dreams of witchetty grubs. The air, so thick with pollen, sinks into their lungs, and then, as a grand bouquet bursts forth in mind, they gently breathe again. The trickling water calms their souls, the luscious seam gives light. Through dense and fertile lands they roam, mid ancient trees they drift. These souls, they live in Eden, they walk with God each day. The breath of life flows through their lungs, great nature guides their way. And if I dare to wonder, if I dare to be aware, I'll walk the paths where they have gone, and I'll tread softly there. And as I tend the garden, sweet remembrance will be mine of the wisdom which once filled my heart as I walked neath fig and vine. So that's
do you know why fig and vine is in there?
I would say that it's a theme that keeps on coming up.
Okay, but do you know why?
let me answer you another one. So let me answer you by reading another poem. Can I do that?
Before you do that, I want to give you a quick David White poem. It's called Sometimes. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories, who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound. Sometimes if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the old ones in the old stories, who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests, conceived out of nowhere, but in this place beginning to lead everywhere. Requests to stop what you are doing now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Requests to stop what you are doing now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, he's the boss.
Yeah. And it's funny, you know, I feel terrible for doing this, but as you were reading, stop what you're doing, you know, and what I can't remember it exactly, but and what it's making you to do it. At that moment, I was thinking, this really sucks, but I have to say, can we do a part 2? Because it's 5:20 and I know that my wife has made me a beautiful dinner and I know that it's out there on the table and I've got a class in 40 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
But man, like I really want to do a part 2 and I want, can you finish by telling me why the fig and vine is in there?
Right. The fig is a symbol of fertility, creativeness, fertileness, and not only when the masculine principle impregnates or penetrates the feminine principle, it's the fruit that's born as well. The vine is the connection from the top of the tree to the bottom that is not wholly part of the tree, but it carries messages. And it's the same motif as the snake in the Kundalini or the winding serpent on the tree of life, which is not related to a devil or demonic character. It's not that archetype.
Wow. I'm going to have to sit with that for a long, long time.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been definitely, I would say, one of the best podcast conversations I've had on another show, and a truly transformative conversation with you, Rocco. I hope we get to continue to talk and work together, and you know, I'll get you on my show as well, and maybe we could just keep on doing a back and forth thing, continuing that discussion. But sure. Thank you.
You're most welcome. So this is you've been very generous with your time, and I'm assuming this is where you need to pull up stumps and get back to being and becoming.
I do. That's right.
Okay, that's fantastic. So that was a wonderful conversation. I'm going to stop recording over there. Thanks so much, Sean.
Sure. No, thank you. Yeah.
So that was the longer than expected conversation with Simon, and a richer one certainly than I expected. You never know when you first reach out or someone reaches out to you. There's a whole, for those of you who don't know, there's a whole sub-industry of sort of press agents and marketing agents which are reaching out to each other for different podcasters, authors, etc., to try and find plug spots on different people's podcasts. And it's a crapshoot. You don't know the quality that you're going to get. So it was quite refreshing encountering someone like Simon, and you can see that sense of pleasure and a pleasant surprise was mutual. So you would have heard that Simon was at one time a Mormon. Then he stepped away from that faith and found comfort of a sort in Western contemplative tradition, specifically the philosophy of Stoicism, which created the conditions for a kind of ripening, whereby recently, through the medium of poetry and music, Simon underwent and is still undergoing an awakening. And there's a quote by Amy Chua, the author of Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. And the question or the quote is, do you know what a foreign accent is? A foreign accent is a sign of bravery. And this is meant to point out that speaking in a strong accent and often flawed English is something usually that people scorn, but it's in fact not something to scorn at, because rather than a sign that of someone's ignorance, what it actually means is it's a sign that someone had the courage to move to another country and learn a new language and submit themselves to the cultural judgments of a foreign society and rebuild their life in that manner. And that's the way I regard people like Simon. It's a sign of a mature soul to change your faith and to let the pendulum swing all the way across, and then find a new courage again to go and carefully pick through the rubble and find the gold that you threw out in the proverbial bathwater. And his work reflects that. If you want to make contact with Simon, his website is thewalledgarden.com, and you can also find there's links to his podcast there and the community group that he's busy growing. And you can also find the Walled Garden podcast on any of the popular platforms. I'll leave links to Simon's work in the show notes. And beyond that, if there's any questions or feedback, email me info@eyeswideopenlife.org. As always, looking forward to hearing from you. I'm probably going to be doing an Ask Me Anything episode coming up real soon. So if you have any questions, now's a really good time to submit them. info@eyeswideopenlife.org. And that's about it for this episode, and I look forward to having you all back next time.